So, for those of you who are unfamiliar, yesterday was Malcolm X's birthday. Um, Also, Frederick Douglass's chosen birthday was on the 14th. I didn't know that before, but Frederick Douglass didn't know his original birthday because he was born a slave, so he chose to celebrate his birthday on February 14th. So, happy belated birthday to Frederick Douglass and happy birthday to Malcolm X. And I went to George Floyd Square and we shared dialogue around capitalism, black capitalism, a number of things, but those were the two main subjects. And there were also a lot of other things going on. There was food, there was hot cocoa, cider, and coffee galore. Shout out to, I think, Butchie. I think it's Butchie that supplied the drinks, as Butchie usually does. And I'll hit you up later on Venmo. Sledding, skiing, broomball, because there will be joy in the revolution. And it was definitely the energy that I need to be around. I'm glad I went out today, especially after being immobile due to the weather for almost 2 weeks. There was a lot said that the world definitely needs to hear, but some of the things I'm going to point out are surrounding how the subject of how Martin Luther King became such a prolific historical figure that people quote to this day, and we still have to teach Malcolm X in an outside alternative form of education because our whitewashed history doesn't like to acknowledge figures like Malcolm X. The reason that I believe, I'm speaking for myself, that history doesn't acknowledge Malcolm X in the same way is because they can't bastardize, white people, can't bastardize Malcolm X like they bastardized Martin Luther King. And when I say bastardize, I mean completely rape Dr. Martin Luther King's message. White people started using Martin Luther King Jr.'s message against the people that he was advocating for and the people that chose to be there with him throughout that whole movement. Anytime somebody says that's not what MLK would have wanted, they're lying. That's exactly what MLK would have wanted, because MLK was anti-capitalist. So is Malcolm X. MLK isn't, some people will say that he is more digestible. No, there's a difference between being more digestible and being able to take things out of context to fit a narrative. And that is how people use Dr. Martin Luther King. When a white person or even other black people try to shout down the voices of the unheard, that is a horrendous dehumanizing act towards the person who said those words. Whereas that cannot be said for Malcolm X. Malcolm X said, burn this shit down. Malcolm X said, by any means necessary. And people treat history like it's isolated incidences. Anne Frank, Malcolm X, and someone else prolific, I forgot. But the point is, Anne Frank, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King, they were all alive at the same time. And the way our whitewashed history prioritizes things makes things seem like isolated incidents throughout history. World War I happened at the same time as slavery. And the people that fought in World War I and the descendants of those people who fought in World War I, those were a lot of the people who were against slavery later. Regardless of how they felt about it beforehand, usually. Like, like how most veterans are anti-war when they have seen the horrors of war. Like that. And we frame World War I as though it's a different isolated event, even though those things were going on at the same time. And it's a lot to process as one person, that we have to break down and fully unlearn not only what we've learned, but the way we've learned it. This whole system that we were brought in that teaches us that we have to be somewhere at a certain time, we have to eat when they tell us to, we have to take a break when they tell us to, we have to operate on someone else's dime, to grow up, to go out into the world, to always have to operate on someone else's dime, to have to ask to go to the bathroom, to have to wait for the time to eat instead of just eating, instead of just going to the bathroom. Putting our normal human functions aside as a basic thing that we learn as soon as we start going to school. When we know that when we go out into the world, we make our own rules. When we go out into the world, we don't have to ask to go use the bathroom. We eat whenever we want, for the most part, depending on what kind of job you have. But a lot of people spend their lives eating whenever they want. We're taught to hate ourselves and hate our natural bodily functions. And then we are taught to hate others. We're taught to hate our neighbors and idolize the rich, and fed this lie that we also have the possibility to become rich. Nobody has the possibility to become rich because the rich people are already rich. Because of generational wealth that's already been accumulated by white people. Now, on the off chance that you make the next best product or you win the lottery or something, that's not totally unrealistic, but not everybody can be rich. And then there are obviously a whole lot of poor people. While there are people in these mansions with all these cars and stuff, somebody's freezing to death right now because they couldn't even get an apartment. They couldn't rent a hotel room. They couldn't buy a loaf of bread. So they're freezing and starving. And that's without the winter storm. That happens all the time. So, yeah. Everybody around the city has a whole lot of feelings about the trial being in like 2 weeks. It's probably best I just leave this here.